So today what we do is basically our chapter would be production and cost revision. So when you look at production and cost, first let's start off with production, right? So when we look at production we look at short run versus long run production. So let's start with short run first. So when you look at short run versus long run, short run is basically when at least one factor of production is fixed. What do you mean by fixed factor of production? Fixed factor of production is a production factor that doesn't change when quantity changes. Like for example, if I'm teaching more kids, right? So the quantity of output is changing, but the classroom is not changing. So this classroom would become what we call a fixed factor. So in the short run, we say at least one factor of production is fixed. While in the long run, what we argue is that all factors of production are variable. Okay, an example of a fixed factor could be your building. A fixed factor could be your building. Typically, building is a fixed factor, and your variable factor would be, for example, your labor. Okay, why do we do production before cost? Because production, whatever happens in production, will have an implication on cost. So short run is where at least one factor of production is fixed. Long run is where all factors of production are variable, so there is no fixed factor. Makes sense? So when you look at short run, let's move on to short run production. What we believe is that in the short run, whenever whenever we increase inputs, or rather whenever we increase variable sort of inputs or variable factors, because fixed factor is not changing, right? The quantity of output changes. So let's say if I want to increase my output, this is what happens. So this is my quantity, and this is my total output, which is also called total product. Total product is simply total output. So what we say is this thing happens. Let's call this Q1, Q2. What we say is this: initially, as you increase the output, your output rises, but at a faster rate. And then, as we go from Q1 to Q2, for example, we'll realize that after some point, output would start to rise at a slower rate. And there comes a point then that output would start to sort of fall. So in other words, we believe that the output is not increasing in a linear fashion. It is increasing in a non-linear fashion. In fact, what we believe is this, that initially output is rising at a faster rate. TP is rising at a faster rate. And then comes a point when TP is rising at a slower rate. And then comes a point when the TP is falling. And we believe this happens because of a reason which we called law of diminishing marginal returns. Basically, one more thing is just that I'm actually, when you look at this, I'm actually increasing my quantity of sort of variable factor or labor here. I'm not increasing my quantity of output, I'm increasing my quantity of labor here. Sorry for that. I'm increasing my quantity of labor, so that's why I'm increasing my variable input, and that is changing my quantity of output, because that's the quantity of output. Quantity TP is your quantity of output. So as I'm hiring more labor, what I'm seeing is that initially labor is increasing output but at a faster rate. Why is it happening like this? Let's call this zone 1. In zone 1, basically what is happening is two things. Number one is this, that when you are increasing labor, it could be possible that your capital utilization is not proper. Let's say if I switch on both the ACs and only 5 kids are sitting here, you guys will be saying that, you know what, can you please close the AC because it's really cold. These two ACs are designed to put in a class when the class is completely full, which would mean that I am actually not utilizing my capital properly if I switch on both the ACs. So initially what happens is this, that when you have few workers and you keep on hiring more workers, the capital utilization is better. Capital utilization improves, and that results in basically your TP to rise faster. Then what happens is this, another reason that could happen is this, that initially we say that probably if one guy is hired, he's probably operating and managing everything. But when more people come, there could be a possibility of specialization. So what we believe is that initially specialization also causes the total product to rise. So this is basically what is happening in our zone 1, as we call it. So let's call it zone 1. So why is TP rising at a faster rate initially? Because as I hire more labor, probably we're utilizing your capital better, or we are probably taking advantage of specialization. Okay, both of these reasons can be causing my TP to rise at a faster rate. Is that fine? Then comes a point when TP is rising at a slower rate. Let's call this zone number 2. Okay, in zone 2, TP is rising at a slower rate. Before I want to talk about TP is rising at a slower rate, I want to talk about basically the concept of marginal product. Marginal product is simply what we call slope of total product. It is change in TP over change in Q. Remember, and Q of quantity of labor. So remember, slope का formula क्या होता है? Slope is basically change in Y over change in X. So if I ask you what's the slope of this graph, you'll be saying that will be change in TP over change in quantity of labor. And this graph slope tells us the rate, slope always tells us the rate at which TP is changing. So the rate at which TP is changing is basically your marginal product. Make sense? So if I draw the marginal products graph, and I'll come back to then zone 2, but before I move on, is there any question? If I draw the marginal products graph, marginal product graph would look like this. So this is Q1 of labor, this is Q2 of labor, this is my quantity of labor, which is my variable factor. I'm hiring more labor to increase my output, and this is my MP. So my marginal product looks like this. Initially, TP is rising at a faster rate, so MP is rising. And then TP is rising at a slower rate, then MP is falling. And then TP is falling, MP is negative. So my MP is positive, or rather MP is rising, and then MP is falling, and then MP is negative. Okay, so we saw this when the TP was rising at a faster rate, its slope is increasing. When TP is rising at a slower rate, its slope is falling, and this falling slope is called the slope. TP is rising at a slower rate, MP is falling, and that's called the diminishing marginal return. Diminishing marginal return is the crux of this whole theory, and we need to understand this really well, what exactly that is. So the theory says this, that as quantity of labor rises, the capital over labor ratio basically falls. Same capital, remember we are in the short run, same capital, and I'm adding more labor. You keep on adding more labor, each labor would get less and less of capital to work with. If this table is my fixed factor, I keep on adding more workers to work on this table. There comes a point this table which is a fixed factor, would become super crowded, and it will affect my productivity, someone else who's working on this table, everyone's productivity. Which means if you don't change the fixed factor in the short run and you keep on adding variable factor on it, each labor would get small capital to work with, and their productivity or MP, which is the extra productivity, will fall. So what is MP? MP is basically the extra output, in this case, from an additional worker, and that extra output from an additional worker is actually falling at a point when you're adding more and more workers. Make sense? So we believe this is not an economic law. We believe this is actually a physical law. Because you're not changing the fixed factor, there will come a point when this fixed factor would give you lower return for each variable factor. Think about this. I have these two ACs and I keep on filling this class with with more kids. There comes a point when you guys will be like, sir, it's really hot. Can we do something about it? Can we switch on the fans or something like that? When does that happen? That means the same fixed factor is divided into so many variable factors that each variable factor will get less and less of the fixed factor. And that's what we call diminishing marginal return, which happens in the short run because some factors are fixed. And that's why our MP is falling or TP is rising at a slower rate. So because TP is rising at a slower rate or MP is falling, and the reason is because we are not changing the fixed factor and we are only adding the variable factor. So productivity will start to get affected. Make sense? So remember this, as Q of labor rises, your MP of labor will fall because of the law of diminishing marginal return. Okay, it's not the law of diminishing marginal utility, which is the concept we learn in our utility chapter, but this is law of diminishing marginal return. Okay, are we good? This brings us to the next concept, which is the third zone, which is this brings us to the next sort of idea, which is basically your Y is by TP falling or MP is negative. There comes a point when it becomes so crowded. This is zone 3. In the zone 3, what we believe is that there comes a point when it becomes super crowded, or it becomes such a point that your TP is negative. When TP is negative, then each worker that you hire is bringing what we call, TP is not negative, TP is falling. If TP is falling, this means that each worker is bringing something which is called a negative output. MP is negative. For example, if it becomes so crowded that the production process stops, then something like this would happen. So there comes a point when the MP is negative, primarily because you have overhired and now the capital isn't really giving you what it should give you. Isn't giving you a positive return, but probably machine is breaking down, or it's become so overcrowded, or something or the other has happened which makes MP negative. Okay, so that's the story for the production, which is basically the MP part of the theory. Then comes something else which is called relationship between MP and AP. But before I move on to MP and AP, is there any question? Okay, are we going to move on? Let's talk about something called relationship between MP and AP. Now, what happens with MP and AP is something like this. What is AP first of all? AP is simply total product or total output over quantity of labor. It is basically output per worker. Simple average is your AP. And if I have quantity of labor, okay, and if I have MP and TP here, MP and AP here, my MP I know rises, and then the law of diminishing marginal return would set in, MP would fall, and it then becomes negative. Right? This is Q1 and Q2. AP on the other hand, or average on the other hand, behaves like this. Initially, and we'll talk about why, initially AP would rise. As soon as it meets MP, AP would start to fall. Okay, so this is the point when AP is maximum. So in other words, MP is greater than AP, AP rises. MP less than AP, AP falls. And MP meets AP at AP's maximum point. Okay, so MP is above AP, AP rises, MP above AP, MP is less than AP. Look at this, MP above AP, AP is rising, MP is below AP, AP is falling. Why? Let's talk about this. So why does this happen? We say basically this happens because of the simple reason that if I do better than the average, let's say my average is 5 and I score better than my average, what happens to my average? It will go up. Isn't that true? आपके दो टेस्ट हैं, दो टेस्ट में आपने 5 और 5 आए और तीसरे टेस्ट में आपके आ गए 10, तो 10 और 10 भी नहीं करते, 5 और 5 10 होते, तीसरे टेस्ट में आ गए आपके 12 बल्कि 14, तीसरे टेस्ट में आ गए 14. So what 14 plus 10 is 24. 24 divided by 3 tests is 8. Your average was 5 because first test 5, second test 5, third test you did better than the average went up. Margin is the extra. If you do better than the average, you pull up average. When MP is above AP, it is pulling up AP because you're doing better than the average is going up. Make sense? Does that make sense? Every time you do better than the average, MP is the extra, right? Every time an extra worker brings more than the average output, it will pull up average. But there comes a point when MP goes below AP. You do worse than the average, you pull down average. Are you all with me? If you do worse than the average, let's say your average is 8 out of 3 tests. The next test, let's say you get only 4. So that would be 24 plus 4 is 28. 28 divided by 4 is 7. Does that make sense? So what happens here is the average is going down because you did worse than the average. When MP is below AP, it makes AP go down. So before MP meet AP, AP was rising and MP was making AP rise. After MP meets AP, AP is falling. So that's why MP must be meeting AP at AP's maximum point. Before MP met AP, AP was rising. After MP met AP, AP started to fall. It's like a really bad friend that you meet and then your life goes downhill. It happens, right? You know, like the parents say that, you know, like, अच्छा खासा बच्चा था फिर दोस्ती हो गई उससे और उसके बाद ख़राब हो गया. This is when you met that friend who makes you ख़राब and that's when life goes downhill. Maybe you are the friend who's making ख़राब. People ख़राब. Anyways, so MP meets AP, AP rises. AP was rising, life was going good. But as soon as MP meets AP, AP starts to fall because MP MP is really kharab, so you become slightly more kharab. Does that make sense? That's the relationship between MP and AP. So this is your short run production, and the implication of short run production will be in the terms of cost. Does that make sense? Any question? Let's now move on to cost.